Hi guys, I'm Ruby. Today's video is the first video in our new series called The World's Religions. Today's video is on Hinduism. I actually found it extremely interesting. So, without further ado, I hope you guys like it. Let's get right into the video. If we were in need of a religion that shines light on some of the deepest problems in life and offers solutions to some of them, one could not do much better than the Hinduism of India. This ancient Eastern religion's influence can be seen in the modern Western world. After the first successful test of the atomic bomb in 1945, one of the chief scientists involved in creating it, Robert Oppenheimer, famously quoted the Hindu text of Bhagavad Gita. "I am become death, the shatterer of worlds, waiting that hour that ripens to their doom." In the midst of the war-torn 20th century, perhaps the most famous practitioner of Hinduism, Mahatma Gandhi, created a stark contrast to the evils of Stalin and Hitler. His peaceful protests led to the British withdrawal from India without resorting to violence. Gandhi's non-violent strategy inspired Martin Luther King Jr. to use the same principles in the civil rights movement in the United States. In today's day and age, you would be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't heard of yoga. But what is Hinduism actually all about? If we were to take all of its vast teachings and extract the essence, it would be something along the lines of, you can have what you want. Now this sounds great at first, but if we were to really think about it, what is it exactly that we really want? It's easy enough to give a simple answer, but not so easy to give a good one. Hinduism says people want 4 things. The first of which is pleasure. By no means do they believe that pleasure is the highest pursuit, but they do not look down on the pursuit of pleasure. They believe it to be natural, and to the person who wants it, they say go for it. There's nothing wrong with wanting pleasure. It is a legitimate human need. After all, the world is full of beauty and sensible delights. However, they believe that pleasure should be pursued with good sense. We can't follow every impulse, and we must make some short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. Any impulses that would injure someone must be avoided, lest we end up lying, cheating, stealing, or succumbing to addictions. However, if we adhere to the basic rules of morality, we need not suppress the desire for pleasure, but rather seek it intelligently. Hinduism gives us the go-ahead to seek our pleasures, and then it waits patiently, knowing full well that before too long we will be back, when we realize pleasure is not all that we want. It is too trivial to satisfy our total nature. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard attempted to make pleasure the guiding principle of his life. He wrote about its utter failure in his book, Sickness unto Death. "In the bottomless ocean of pleasure, I have sounded in vain for a spot to cast anchor. I have felt the almost irresistible power with which one pleasure drags another after it." Sooner or later, everyone wants to experience something more than fleeting pleasure. When we reach out to this conclusion, Hinduism says we switch to the second major desire in life, worldly success. Wealth, fame, and power are worthy goals, they say, and should not be condemned. The satisfaction of success lasts much longer than that of pleasure. The drive to achieve power, recognition, and possessions run deep, and it's essential for our survival. When we succeed beyond the requirements of survival, we are rewarded with dignity and self-respect. However, these rewards have their limits as well. First and foremost, success is often a lonely road and cannot be shared with others without diminishing it. On top of this, the drive for success is insatiable. A Hindu idiom states, "To try to extinguish the drive for riches with money is like trying to quench a fire by pouring butter over it." Just like pleasure, This desire centers on the self, and thus is too small to satisfy our craving for something more in life. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "There comes a time when one asks even of Shakespeare, even of Beethoven, is this all?" It is this conclusion that Hinduism has been waiting for. Only once we realize that these worldly pursuits are a dead end are we able to make the third desire of our chief goal in life. This desire is for joy, but we don't want just fleeting joy. What we really want is infinite joy. The Hindus believe that behind this desire for joy, what we really want is infinite being, infinite knowledge, and infinite bliss. Obviously, we still settle for less, but what it boils down to is we want freedom from our own limitations. Hinduism says we can achieve exactly that, for we are more than just a body or a personality. Hinduism believes that underlying our human self, there is an infinite being hidden within called Atman. This Atman is part of their Godhead Brahman. But if every individual has an infinite piece of God within, then why don't we act accordingly? The answer, say the Hindus, lies in the depths at which the eternal is buried under almost impenetrable mass of distractions, false assumptions, and self-regarding instincts that comprise our surface selves. In order to overcome these roadblocks, we must learn to let go of our expectation and detach ourselves from our finite self. Only then can we rise above the frustration that prevents us from reaching our spiritual potential. The next obstacle we must overcome is ignorance. The Upanishads speak of a knowing of that knowledge of which brings knowledge of everything. This does not mean we know every trivial detail about life, but rather that we understand the inner workings of our mind that interprets the world. What the psychologists would call the unconscious. The next limitation we must overcome on our path to the infinite is the nature of our restricted existence. This involves our individual smallness compared to the magnitude of the cosmos, and also our limited lifespan. We are able to overcome our smallness by identifying with something bigger than ourselves. An individual who identifies with their family and finds their joy in theirs has made their reality bigger. If one were to identify with all of humanity, all beings essentially connected by God, then their reality could become unlimited. As for our limited time and impending death, the Hindus believe in reincarnation. Although our temporary bodies die, the essence of our being is infinite and manifests again and again. All of this forms the basis of the Hindu religion. Having established the basic problems in life and briefly outlined the solutions, the question then becomes, how do we get to the enlightenment that the solution calls for? Hinduism lays out 4 different paths to get there. They call these paths yogas. Now, the West mistakenly identifies the word yoga with the stretching and breathing exercises that are so popular today. But this picture is incomplete. The word yoga means a method of training designed to integrate or union with Brahman or God. One of the unique aspects of Hinduism is that it takes into account the various types of people and personalities out there. They do not attempt to make all these diverse individuals walk the same path, but rather let them decide what path best suits them. The first path to God is through knowledge. Jnana Yoga is best suited for thinkers and philosophers. The first step in this path is learning. By listening to sages and reading spiritual scripture, one is able to learn how their being is part of being itself. The next step is thinking. By pondering and reflecting on the spiritual truth, we have learned we can start to distinguish between the aspects of our lower self and our higher self. If the yogi is able and diligent, such reflections will eventually include a lively sense of the infinite self that underlies one's temporary finite self. The final step is embodying our revelations and acting them out in our daily lives. It's not enough to just realize we are spirit in our meditations and reflections. We must apply this knowledge in our life by separating our higher self and the ego-centered experience of our body. There is the body experiencing reality, the mind that reacts to it, and then there is an awareness that observes the whole process happening. By identifying with the awareness and not the body or the mind, we can detach from it as if it were a completely separate being. The next path to God is through love. This path is for people who are more driven by emotion rather than logic. Bhakti Yoga aims to direct the love that exists in every heart towards God. This path is the most popular of all four. Christianity exemplifies the principle of Bhakti Yoga perfectly. As a matter of fact, the Hindus believe that Christianity is a great path to take if one wishes to pursue Bhakti Yoga. Unlike the path of knowledge's pursuit of knowing the infinite within, the path of love seeks to adore the external God with all of their infinite self. All that needs to be done in this yoga is to love God dearly. Not just to aim that you love, but actually love with no ulterior reason, such as enlightenment or to receive love in return, but rather just for love's sake alone. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, "Those who meditate on me and worship me without any attachment to anything else, those I soon lift from the ocean of death." In the Bhakti Yoga path, one must choose from the many forms God takes and place one above the rest to give their love to. It doesn't matter which incarnation they pick. They even believe Christ was a God-man, but they believe that there have been many other God-men, such as Rama, Krishna, and the Buddha. The third path to God is through work. The path of karma yoga is best suited for the extroverted people who live an active lifestyle. The drive to immerse oneself in work goes beyond a mere means for survival. Forced to be idle or retire, most people become irritable and their health declines. This path say that one can find God in their everyday affairs. They do this by throwing their entire self into their work, but they do not do it for personal gain. Instead, they do it for God's sake instead of their own. They believe that to be diligent and competent is God's will, and by succeeding in their work, they bring glory to God. The Bhagavad Gita says, "Whatsoever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer in sacrifice, whatever you give, whatever austerity you practice, O son of Kunti, do this as an offering to me. Thus shall be free from the bondages of actions that bear good and evil results." This means one is to take on tasks as a duty, not for the potential rewards they offer. Hence the story of the yogi who, meditating beside a river, saw a scorpion fall into the water. He rescues the scorpion only to immediately be bitten by it. It falls into the river 2 more times, and both times he rescues it only to be bitten again each time. When asked why he kept rescuing it when clearly it wasn't grateful for the help, he replied, "It is the nature of scorpions to bite. It is the nature of yogis to help others when they can." The final path to God is through psychophysical exercise. The path of Raja Yoga, that is so well known in the Western world, is best suited for scientifically minded people who want to find good through psychophysical experiments. We conduct this experiment on ourselves in our mind by practicing prescribed exercises and seeing how it makes us feel subjectively. In this sense, one need not accept any kind of dogmatic view, but rather they learn to trust the experiences they are having in their mind, body, and soul. By placing the body in uncomfortable positions over and over and practicing the prescribed breathing techniques, achieve a state of relaxation in the mind despite the uncomfortable position of the body. This balance of mind and body are called asanas, which usually translates to postures. By achieving this balance, we are teaching our mind to master the body. Only once we achieve this mastery can we overcome the distractions that prevent us from reaping the rewards of contemplation and meditation. Mahatma Gandhi taught to turn the spotlight inward. Only then can we find peace. Only then can we come to know God. However, even if overcoming the physical sensations that distract us, we must still overcome the racing thoughts that are inward distractions. They do this by first relaxing the mind and allowing all the pent-up thoughts to flow freely. Then they choose one thing to concentrate on. Over time, this ability becomes stronger and stronger. Eventually, the sense of self will disappear, and they merge with the object they are concentrating on. There is no difference between the perceiver and the perceived. Finally, the yogi achieves samadhi, where the self and all objects disappear, and they have become completely absorbed by God. Now that we have covered all four paths, it is important to note that none of these paths are completely exclusive. Most Hindus follow more than one throughout their life, and Hinduism encourages its followers to try them all. Not only does Hinduism call attention to the different natures people have when choosing a path, but they also acknowledge the various stages of life that change all people. The first stage being that of the student. Children are initiated into Hinduism between the ages of 8 and 12. The student stage lasted about 12 years, while their primary goal was to learn. The second stage is that of the householder and begins with marriage. During this stage, their main concerns are family, work, and community. The third stage is one many people try and reject, to their own misfortune. This is the stage of retirement, and it begins after the first grandchild is born. At this stage, one is no longer concerned about social obligations and is more interested in contemplating the meaning of life. The final stage is when one has achieved wisdom over their contemplation and has reached a state of sannyasin, which means one who neither hates or loves anything. They are then able to return to social life completely changed and free of all the worldly problems that plague their younger generations. Hinduism warns against trying to understand God as an abstract consciousness. The human mind cannot fully understand the infinite. Instead, they suggest to think of God as an archetype of the noblest reality they could possibly encounter in the natural world. This means thinking of God as a supreme person. They call this concept Saguna Brahman, which has actual attributes, whereas they refer to the more abstract idea of God as consciousness or the universe as Nirguna Brahman, which has no attributes. Hinduism has gods of both types. In the more personal concept of Saguna Brahman, God will stand in the relation to the world as a creator like Brahman, a perseverer like Vishnu, or a destroyer like Shiva. Human souls, or jivas, enter the world mysteriously by God's power. This spirit depends on the body no more than the body depends on clothes. The soul passes through a sequence of bodies in a process called samsara, or reincarnation. The spirit starts out in a subhuman level, and every time it reincarnates into a more complex life form until eventually it reaches the pinnacle of the human body. Up to this point, the soul's growth is automatic. With the self-consciousness of human existence comes responsibility. The soul is now subject to the law of karma, which states the God's universe is moral, and so we shall reap what we sow. The soul's progress at this point is not linear, as our various reincarnations fluctuate in ability to transcend worldly desires. But what would happen if we fully transcended and broke the cycle of reincarnation? Some say the soul would become one with God for eternity. Others say they retain a semblance of their individuality and live with God in bliss. Hinduism's view of the universe would look something like this. Innumerable galaxies just like our own, each centering in an earth where people attempted to find their way to God. Surrounding the earth would be a number of greater worlds above and lesser worlds below. Depending on how the soul did during its most recent incarnation, would decide which of these worlds it would go to repair in between reincarnations. The earth is located dead center in the ascending heavens that get greater and greater as you go up, and the descending hells that get worse and worse as you go down. This means the world is halfway between heaven and hell, which is why it is locked in the perpetual struggle of good and evil, which seem to be equal forces. Hindus refer to our observable world as Maya. They do not believe that the natural world exists outside of God. Instead, they believe it is real in the sense that a dream is real. The dream exists in the same sense that we have them, but that doesn't mean the dream exists objectively. In this sense, the world exists because we experience it. This experience, they believe, is God-given, but they do not need to believe it exists outside of the mind experiencing it. To sum up Hinduism's explanation of the world: 1. There are multiple worlds and innumerable galaxies horizontally, innumerable tiers vertically, and innumerable cycles temporarily. 2. The world is moral and always subject to the law of karma. 3. The world is in the middle of tiers and can never replace the paradise that is the spirit's destination. 4. Maya is deceptively tricky, making the world seem as the ultimate reality when in fact it is temporary. 5. It is a training ground for people to reach their highest potential. Hinduism doesn't claim to have any monopoly on the religious path. They believe all religions are different paths to achieve the same goal: union with God. All the differences in culture, history, geography, and temperament make life interesting and beautifully diverse. We may all start at different points at the base of the mountain, but Hinduism rejoices knowing that we shall all meet at the summit.